Well, where I left you off last time, I was starting to place in some cobblestone without really explaining what was going on. Yeah, basically just starting to get to work on figuring out a shape for these floating islands. This is going to be a pretty massive job because not only do I have to scaffold all of this, but then I also plan on going back through and texturing it all. So yeah, this is going to be a pretty massive amount of materials needed. But now that I've got 3 sides in, what I'm thinking I do now is start to make a big lake up here. So using the stone that I still have, I can start to make a bit of a outline shape for this lake. Oh, yikes. That was the only stone that I actually had. Well, I guess that means I'm going to have to spend some time over at the stone generator then. So I headed over to the stone generator to try and pass a vibe check. As you can see, I'm kind of vibrating back and forth trying to pass it, and this is the result. Well, this will be a pretty good start. So the idea for this lake came up when I actually created this village, and someone in the comments suggested that we could make it make sense that there's heaps of fishermen in the village by putting a lake in the sky, which I kind of loved that idea. And I've also kind of branched off it with having a couple of other future ideas to go with it. But yeah, it's taken me all this time to actually come back and start on this project. And I would say that's not a bad start for the shape. So I started to fill in the outside with stone and obviously then filled it all in, trying to add some level to the texturing, and I ran out of stone. Holy, do I have my work cut out for me here. But I have the vision. I know this is going to look so sick when it's done. But of course I can't actually get it done until I get more stone. So yeah, I'm going to just be chilling here for a little while. Well, one session of chilling later, and I'm hoping that this will be enough stone to get pretty massive dent put into this project. So I mean, at this stage, what more can I do but get placing some stone? I think realistically the next thing that needs to happen is laying out the basin of this thing and basically figuring out the rough shape of the actual lake first. Well, obviously we've got the outside of the lake, but I mean the depth and profile of the lake probably doesn't need to be that deep. So most of it can be down at this level. Well, this shape should be a good start. And now I can start to shape the edge profile up to the top, preferably keeping it not too steep. So something like that. And now I've just got to do it in a few more spots. I'm thinking probably 1 each end and then maybe 3 on each side. So I'm just going to get straight into this. So I did exactly what I said I was going to do. 3 each side, 1 each end, and well, now we've got a basis. Now that I've got those in, I'm thinking I'll go up to the top and start to figure out the profile of each level, because I mean, that's sort of what makes the most sense to me in my head. So essentially just going around and connecting all the dots. Connecting the dots was a pretty good analogy to use here, because honestly, this was so therapeutic. Just chilling, listening to some music, and placing in stone. I'm actually so happy with this shape, I'm not gonna lie. So even though that took a little over a shulker box full of stone, it didn't take too long. Approaching day 600 and we've got the base of the lake set out. And so now the next step is going to be bringing in some moss, converting everything into moss, and then going through the arduous task of turning everything into podzol with giant spruce trees, and then turning that podzol into dirt. But I mean, hey, done it once before, so I've got better gear this time at least. Got our moss block, and just going to grab heaps of bones from here. Alright, got plenty of bone meal, so let's get started on spreading this moss. So this is obviously part 1 of converting all the stone into dirt, and it wasn't too bad, but this 10-second time lapse took about 30 minutes of my time. Oh my god, I almost said to myself it's finally done, but that's only one stage. I now have to go and plant a bunch of trees. At least with this stage of the process I get a bunch of wood out of it. But yeah, this is going to take a while. But I mean, realistically, this project was my idea, so I shouldn't be complaining. I could only plant 11 trees with the amount of saplings that I had in my chest system, so now I'm going to have to go and tear down all of these before I can continue turning everything into podzol. It's all good fun though, don't worry about it. Well, I'm about a third of the way done now, so I guess I better keep going. Now on to the easy part. And there you go. After like 4 hours, I have turned all of that stone into dirt. Impressive, right? In hindsight, it may have actually been quicker to do the coarse dirt trick instead of, that whole process that I just went through. But at least this way, I got a bunch of spruce to use in future builds. Either way, now that this is all filled up and dried out, I can go through and fill up the lake with water. And because Whip said so, I need to make all of these source blocks. At least this is a bit more soothing than the other process we just had to go through. This process was pretty much just taking the source blocks around the edge and the water fills up the rest of it. Looking pretty cool. What I initially had in mind was filling up the water all the way to the top, but I want to put mud around the outside of the bank, so it kind of makes more sense to have that on a lower level. But I also want the entirety of the bottom of the lake to be mud as well, which will be pretty similar to what Fwip did with the river that he made in his hardcore survival world. So that means grabbing a glass bottle, then heading underwater to place mud everywhere, which shouldn't take as long as converting all the stone took, so could be worse. But in saying that, it might be a good idea to get respiration on our helmet first, and depth strider on my boots. And now this should go a lot faster. And then I can just come through and place some bone meal down on the bottom of the lake, just to try and make it look not so flat from the surface. And so the inside of the lake is finally complete. So I'll just go around the edge in certain locations to make it a bit muddy, just to change up the texture a little bit. And so here we are on day 600, and the terraforming for the lake is complete. Got some mud patches scattered around with coarse dirt surrounding it so that it's not such a harsh transition from grass to mud. And then I've also placed in some sugarcane which will grow, and bone mealed the area and removed all the poppies and dandelions. But of course, because we are in a flower forest, we've also got azure bluets and tulips scattered around, which I left in there. So anyway, now that it's all completed, the other part to this that I would like to get done is putting in a couple of fisherman huts and a fishing spot somewhere over on this side of the lake. Okay, so I'm thinking one fisherman hut somewhere around here, and I'm using the term hut because these things aren't really going to be very big. It's something just very basic with some spruce and a super simple roof over the top. Something very simple just like this, and then we can break up the shape of the walls a little bit by chucking in a couple of random windows, and then we can just make a little lean-to to one side, which we can turn into a little work area. Decorating the inside can make a couple of bunk beds, and then place around a few barrels, and realistically the inside of a fisher hut probably doesn't need to be anything more than what's in here. Then around the side we can replace the dirt underneath the lean-to coarse dirt, just to sort of signal that it's a worked area. Make a little workbench here, and again a couple of barrels, because I mean they are fishermen after all. And then using a couple of item frames we can put some fish down on the bench and make them invisible. So now it looks like they've just been filleting some fish on their workbench. And then immediately after I finish the first hut, I went and made a more log cabin styled building for the other fishermen to go and live in. And so now there's a second fisher hut. Got some bunk beds again, very similar interior, and then another lean-to with another workspace. And so now what I'd like to do is make a little pier for the fishermen to fish off of. Lucky me, it started raining. Every Minecraft YouTuber's worst nightmare, recording in the rain. Well, anyway, now that those are completed, I just want to transport a couple of villagers across and then make some pathways around the lake and send off a few villagers. Sweet. Now we've got some fisher villagers hanging around the fisherman huts. So things are looking a little bit more alive around here. And so the other thing that I wanted to do was bring in some paths around to the lake. I am pretty happy with this. This island is looking more and more like an actual village, but the underneath still needs work. Which brings us back to where we started this episode. Now I need to continue figuring out the shape of the underside of this floating island. With the shape for the first 3 sides already being completed, this was just doing more of the same, making sure that the profile worked with the lake. I think the easiest way to tackle this from here is going to be connecting the dots similarly to how I went about filling up the lake. Because I feel like if I just keep doing guide lines, this is probably going to get a little bit more confusing on such a large scale. So I've just been working on 1/4 of it to start with. And I think I want to just zoom out a little bit and see if the shape is actually looking good or not. Which, I mean, that looks fairly natural, so I think I'm happy with the approach I'm taking here. Just got to place in a lot more stone. And place in a lot more stone I did, where here we can see the first 1/4 of the underside of the floating island getting filled in. How sick is this looking? But I'm only a 1/4 of the way done. God. Looks pretty cool from the inside. But all of this stone was about 3 shulker boxes worth, and I had about 4. I really didn't understand what I was getting myself into with this project. So now I'll repair all my tools and mine a heap more stone. Now I'm hoping that these 6 shulker boxes full of stone will get the job done. Well, to start off, I want to get rid of all this cobblestone and replace it with stone. Well, now I have no excuse but to keep going. I really started to get into a groove now moving into the second 1/4 of this floating island. Having already done a fair bit of terraforming, there were certain patterns that started to form in the way that I was placing blocks, which meant that things kept getting more and more efficient as I was going. And well, now we have half of the floating island complete. And we are now halfway done. So I guess I'll just keep placing stone. I think taking on a project of this size has given me a newfound appreciation for Minecraft YouTubers in general, because some people are putting out crazy massive projects, and just the sheer amount of time that goes into actually completing something like this is kind of crazy. And you don't really understand the full weight of the amount of time that goes into something like this until you try it yourself. So yeah, probably don't try this at home. But if you do, prepare yourself for a lot of work. Holy shit, it's actually done. Well, I mean, the shape of it's done at least. But if you take a step back and look at it, it's pretty dark. And it also makes no sense as to why this thing is floating. And well, I've been thinking about that. How can I make this canonically make sense as to why the island is actually floating in the sky? And the best thing I could come up with was amethyst. So even though the little amethyst farm that's set up here pretty bare at the moment, geodes are a dime a dozen out here. So I'm just going to fly around and get a bunch of amethyst to put at the bottom of this island. So heading back down, I am hoping that this is going to be enough amethyst. Just mined out a couple of geodes and had some still left in a chest from previous geodes that I've cleared out. But essentially the idea I've got is to maybe make the bottom 5 or 7 layers of stone amethyst and then sort of sprinkle the amethyst out from there, which will definitely use all of this up. But I'll have to gauge whether or not I have enough when I'm done sprinkling the amethyst. Ah, okay. For some reason I thought amethyst gave off a higher light level than this. Well, I guess plan B is gonna have to be using some glow berries around the outside. But either way, like the amethyst is still gonna give the effect that I wanted it to in terms of trying to give the island some sort of semi-logical way as to why it's floating. Well, I guess I better bone meal some glowberries then. Well, this is going to be interesting, but I'm pretty much just going to have to fly around and try and get some glowberries in random spots. I guess one benefit of this is that the island's going to get a bit of an overgrown feel to it, which is kind of cool. And the spots of light are already starting to make a pretty massive difference. And flying out to take a look at the final thing, this is pretty sick. The glowberries still have to grow in some spots, so the lighting will get a bit better. But damn, I did this in survival. Pretty epic if you ask me. But yeah, I might call it there. So like and subscribe if you enjoyed, and I'll see you in the next one.